right, we're going to move on to the last section. This is a very brief section. I've just remembered something I wanted to share and I haven't put in this. Okay, my first tip and trick that I don't have a slide for. And it relates a little bit to what Rex was saying. How you structure your organization for success. One of the most fundamental structures you have to consider is employment or consultants. Do you offer employment contracts or consultancy contracts to your team? Or do you have to use a combination of both? Some donors will actually require employment contracts, but they're a lot less flexible. And, you know, your staff are going to get paid whether or not the cash is there, because you have an employment contract that you have to honor. So there's much less flexibility, but it's much better work. And it's, you know, I would much rather be an employee than a consultant, in terms of, if I get sick, I don't lose my money for the day. If, you know, it means I get paid holiday as opposed to unpaid holiday. You can't pay a consultant holiday. And in most countries, there are laws around, if you're going to hire someone for a certain amount of time, a certain proportion of their time, they have to be employees. With consultants, you can be a lot more flexible. It's often more expensive in the short term, but in the short term it can be cheaper. In the long term it can be more expensive, but you can be a lot more flexible. So in the Innovative Manufacturing Africa project, the core team has been employees, and the consultants, who are only doing bits of work every now and again for particular activities, have been consultants. So that's one of the first areas in terms of tips and tricks getting started. Think about who can be an employee and who can be a consultant in your project. Another tip, right? I've got slides now. It's really hard to do this financially, but I would really recommend one project manager, one person responsible for overseeing that project. And the reason I'd recommend that is because I've worked in organizations, I've led organizations, and I've worked with organizations where someone is a project manager and they might be managing 10 different projects at once. And it's really hard for them to keep track. So I would recommend, if you can afford it, and even if it means having someone 1 day a week or 2 days a week, one person, one job, rather than, you know, lots of different projects happening. So if you can find a way to do that, that'd be great. That doesn't necessarily mean, and as we saw with Rex's example, that you can't find other ways to structure it that's effective. So the idea of project specialists and a project lead. So I'm not full-time on the RISA project, the Innovative Manufacturing Africa project. I'm actually very part-time on this project. I'm the project lead. So I'm essentially what you might call in academic circles the principal investigator. And that is a job. And at the beginning, I was essentially doing a lot of the role of the project manager, because one of the things I had to do was hire the project manager, was to hire Benita. But there are other roles like project lead, project specialist. These are reasonably recognized terms you can put into your budget. But the project manager is the one person that I would say, one project, one manager, because they've got, particularly on larger projects, they've got deliverables to try and hit. And they need to sort of, you know, with a bit busy chief exec or a busy project lead, they need to try and make sure, and you know, a big team, make sure that things are appearing on time. So yes, that would be one tip and trick, if you can finally find a way to make that happen in the budgets. And the other thing about this is that if you're the makerspace manager, if you're the chief exec of the makerspace organization, you don't necessarily have time to manage projects. You know, what you want to be doing is trying to create space to grow your team, to create space for yourself, so that you can do more fundraising, you can do more going out into the world and exploring new ideas and things. So, you know, in my case, I'm the project lead part-time. The rest of my time, I'm a project lead in other projects, but there's a lot of my time which is about going out into the world and trying to find new funding opportunities and so on. Right. Use restricted funds for grants. I cannot emphasize this tip enough. Use restricted funds for grants. The problem with this is that most finance software and most finance people are not experienced with grants. They have no idea how to manage grants often. So you actually have to find software and accountants, bookkeepers that understand grants. And often it's just, they don't know that they don't know. They think it's easy. It isn't. It can be really hard to find the right software and people to do this. But a restricted fund, which is different to unrestricted funds or designated funds, a restricted fund can only be used for the purpose for which it was given. And sometimes, if you don't use that fund for that purpose, if you don't use all the money, you have to give the money back. It's not your money to spend. And we talked about accountable grants in a previous webinar. I would recommend one restricted fund per grant or per project, not one per donor. Because what if USAID gives you 3 projects? You don't want that in one fund. You need to be able to track those 3 projects separately. So one fund per grant. The process is called accounting by fund. It's literally as simple as that, accounting by fund. So at the Internet of Production, at Distributed Manufacturing Limited, the organizations in this project, we do accounting by fund. We do not do accounting by account. An account might be salaries, taxes, travel, rent, things like that. We don't do it that way. I'm not interested in reports that tell me that. And we don't do it by customer. We don't do accounting by customer. So we don't have a list of all of our clients and who's bringing money in. The word account can mean lots of different things, so be careful. But what you're really looking to do is run a grant under a system of accounting by fund. You're often required to treat grants as restricted funds. It may not say it explicitly, but the implication of what is in the contract is you have to treat it as a restricted fund. You can't use the money for anything else. As an absolute last resort, if you can't find the finance team and you can't find the finance software to help you manage by restricted fund, to help you do accounting by fund, as a last resort, you could have one project or one grant, one bank account. So every project you do, every grant you get has its own bank account. And some donors actually require this, because if you earn interest on the money that they give you from their grant, that money, that interest has to be paid back to them because it's theirs, it's not yours. So they require you to have a separate bank account. But if you can't, having one bank account per project, that's a bit of a last resort. And I would really not recommend it, because you can get yourself into a right pickle. So here's a restricted fund report. Here's an example of a restricted fund report. You have the fund name. For information purposes, you have the value of the project. So grant one from USAID is valued at 10,000. How much income have you received? 10,000. How much have you spent? 10,000. How much is left? 0. That is a beautiful looking project to me. You had all the money, you spent all the money, there's nothing left at the end. Close it. You don't need to manage that restricted fund anymore. You can close the fund. You've done all the reporting, you've sent the final report. There's no need to track that anymore. No one else should be allowed to bill money to that project ever again. Grant 2 went $10 over budget. Grant 3, we're in trouble here. We need to chase payment because, you know, we've spent 17, but they've only paid us 10. Grant 3, well, look what's happening here. 35,000 surplus. That 35,000 from the European Commission is probably cash flowing the 17,000 from the USAID in the UK. That's a dangerous game. It would be better to chase the payment and have the money in. It would be better not to go 7,000 over budget on the, oh, that should be 7,000, not 17,000. We'll change the slide. There's a mathematics problem on the slide there. And then you might have a restricted fund for small grants, for small orders that come in. You haven't done the work yet, so it might be starting soon. So that's the kind of thing that I would like to see every month as a project lead from the finance team. Here's all the projects and how we're doing on them with some actions that might need to be done. So that's when you think about these restricted funds, you're managing grants, you want to be looking at reports like this if you're doing more than one project at a time. Right, another tip and trick. Finance software must be able to give you budget versus actual. The budget of the project versus the actual expenditure of the project. And ideally, it needs to be able to give you this at a glance. Literally, you go into the finance software, hit a button, there's your answer. Unfortunately, no finance software in the world does this out of the box. You have to customize it yourself. And every time you start a project, you have to customize the finance software. Any other kind of report, except a business versus actual, is meaningless for grants. A profit and loss report is meaningless. A transaction list is meaningless. How much you've spent on airfares or rent or salaries is meaningless. What you need is a budget versus actual. And the budget is pretty much directly the budget you've agreed with the donor. I can talk a lot more about this, but I'm not going to do that now because I've only got 3 minutes left. Here is a real screenshot of our budget versus actual report for every line of the Innovative Manufacturing in Africa budget. So you can see in the budget line, we have budget line 2A1, 2A2, 2A3, 2A4. For the travel section is travel is section 2. We've got money for printing, we've got money for the Makerspace Awards or for the consultants. Now, you can see that for Enrico's travel, we had budgeted 14,000. We've only spent 5,000 when this report was done. We actually only had one trainer. We budgeted for 2 trainers. So there's a little note. Is there an issue? No. That's your budget versus actual report. And you need to look at that quite regularly if you're spending lots of money. You've already seen a project initiation document from Rex. I think it was called an activity report. But the project, this is another example of one. It's pretty much the same as what Rex showed. And the idea scenario is that every project will have its own project initiation document, so that people can see what the project's about without reading the whole bid. You can also update it as you go, as things change. And it might be as simple as keeping the location of all of the files in one place, so, or you can use a document to save the passwords for the particular social media channels for that particular project, whatever it might be. You can, as Rex showed us, generate a project dashboard if that's relevant to your organization. And then tracking project changes. This is really important. So if you agree a change to the project, you have to update the project initiation document and keep track of the change. So if, as happened last year for the Innovative Manufacturing Africa project, the donor asks you to go to the Kenya Innovation Week, and we say, great, but we need more money. And they say, okay, well, we'll do a change to the contract so you get a bit more money to pay for the travel and the time of attending that event. Keep evidence of that. If they change the requirements but don't give you any more money, keep evidence of that. And, try and keep it all in one place. So that in 7 years' time, you can look back and see what happened, and you can show the auditors what happened, and you have evidence of it all. So track your project changes as well. Develop a policy handbook. One of the things I'd really recommend is a dedicated finance handbook with all your finance policies and procedures in one place. A staff handbook has all of your employment, policies relevant to employees. These are often required by law for employers, and also review and update the policy handbook with every new project and donor. Here's some contents list of a couple of handbooks, and what I'm going to try and do after the webinar is also put lists of policies that might be useful, like a takedown and notification policy for a website, like a safeguarding policy, like a whistleblowing policy, like an anti-bribery policy, whatever it might be, an environmental policy. All of those policies that donors might require, we're going to try and share those after the activity, but remember that after the webinar, but remember, these are not just for makerspaces, they can be for organizations in general.